I have photographed the largest group of ghosts ever captured in a single camera shot. And there's a fascinating story behind these stunning photographs that lead up to this amazing capture. The story includes the historical background to an original 18th century building here in colonial Williamsburg, Virginia, and one of America's first villains, a man that was absolutely despised by Virginians for what he did to both try and win the Revolutionary War as well as keep his position as royal governor of Virginia. So let's regress a moment for the historical background of the Powder Magazine. That's the name of this building. Now, Governor Spotswood had the octagonal-shaped building built in 1715 as a storehouse for the Virginia militia to defend itself against aggressors, which at that time was mainly attacks from Native Americans, as more and more of them were displaced from their ancestral homes. So the grounds around the Powder Magazine were used to call up and train militiamen when needed. Hold that thought when these incredible photographs are revealed to you. During the period of the French and Indian War, 1754 to 1763, Virginia supported large-scale military operations, and the magazine provided storage for armaments and supplies, such as guns, shot, kegs of powder, flints, tools, swords, canteens, cooking utensils, and flintlocks. So the governor ordered a guardhouse to be built, as well as a wall around the magazine, so that the supplies that were being brought there to Williamsburg and stored until they could be shipped off to British American units were safe. However, for here, the thing for me was George Washington and his men were in and out of that building multiple times before his venture up into western Pennsylvania, which at the time was Virginia. His commanding officer, General Braddock, lost his life and Washington assumed his first command. And he made a few mistakes. When he got back here to Williamsburg, they called him out on those mistakes. But let's fast forward to the mid-1770s. What many people don't realize is that the day after the battles of Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts, Virginia's Governor Dunmore ordered British troops here in Virginia, the same thing that preempted the opening battles to the Revolutionary War, seize the gunpowder stores at the magazine. But the Virginia governor would play a card that the Massachusetts governor did not have. Dunmore made a threat to Virginians they did not take lightly. If any Virginians took up arms against the crown and any British official was harmed, he would declare freedom to the slaves and reduce the city of Williamsburg to ashes. So in other words, any slave that wanted freedom could be granted it if they took up arms for the crown. In the 1760s, slave rebellions were common, so this was a viable threat. Not to mention, the whole southern economy depended on slave labor and would be disrupted. So Virginians were more cautious than their counterparts in Massachusetts. Right across the field from the Powder Magazine, for an example, the Peyton Randolph House lost 8 slaves. They ran away to be part of Lord Dunmore's Ethiopian regiment and had the words "Liberty to Slaves" embroidered on their uniform sashes. Another fact that many do not know is that Virginia Governor Dunmore was accused of, get this, using biological warfare during the Revolutionary War. Lord Dunmore eventually made good on his threat to issue an emancipation proclamation for any slave that would fight for the crown, as well as declaring martial law on November 25th, 1775. Historians estimate that there were about 1,000 slaves in Virginia that took Dunmore up on his offer and made raids right here in Virginia. Dunmore cared nothing for the lives of these former slaves. He gave these men blankets used to cover victims of smallpox, a deadly disease in the 18th century America, and then sent them out into the Virginia countryside in hopes of starting an epidemic. But this idea backfired on Dunmore because he lost most of his slave force to the disease, with little effect on the population of Virginia. As a consequence, Dunmore became what some label the first American villain. In the end, British soldiers got away with about 15 half barrels of gunpowder before citizens in Williamsburg discovered the theft and sounded the alarms, which were drumbeats. An angry mob gathered and was ready to storm the governor's palace to get Dunmore, but several men, including Peyton Randolph, asked for calmer heads to prevail and sent a delegation to Dunmore to demand explanation. Patrick Henry, not so nice. He brought 150 militiamen to Williamsburg and demanded that gunpowder be returned, but avoided a fight when a plantation owner offered to pay for it. About 1 month later, 2 young men were seriously injured when they broke into the magazine. They were shot by a spring gun trap. Opening the door triggered the gun to fire. This aroused an angry mob to storm the building and take it over 1 day later. The records do not show if these 2 young men died or not, but I find it interesting that I was able to capture 2 faces, 2 young men at the powder magazine, one inside the window and one outside at the wall. When Thomas Jefferson moved the capital of Virginia to Richmond in 1780, the powder magazine ceased to be used as a storage facility for armaments and went through a variety of other uses before coming full circle and returning to its original storage function as part of Colonial Williamsburg's living museum. Williamsburg reverted from a bustling capital of America's largest colony to a sleepy little farming and college town. But that all changed in 1862. Some historians and accounts call it the Battle of Fort Magruder, and it took place here on May 5th, 1862. But it wasn't really a fort. It was a series of redoubts, meaning a temporary fortification with walls of dirt. And this spanned the peninsula, and redoubt number 6 was at the center of the Williamsburg line, and it became known as Fort Magruder. It was an elongated pentagon about 9 feet thick, and it was named after its commanding officer. The earthworks were protected by a dry moat about 9 feet deep, so even though it wasn't a conventional fort, it was formidable. Today, not much is left of the earthen fort, now surrounded by a residential neighborhood over a mile away from the magazine. The Confederates killed in battle were brought back to the grounds of the powder magazine and buried in the mass grave there. Tourists staying at the nearby Market Square Tavern have seen a young woman dressed in 19th century attire laying a bouquet of flowers over a freshly dug mass grave. Later, upon an inspection during the daylight, they find no grave and no flowers. Try booking a room at the Market Square Tavern if you'd like to have a paranormal experience. Guests have reported footsteps in the middle of the night, doors opening and closing, Confederate soldiers walking through your room and exiting through a solid wall. The mass gravesite was moved away from the powder magazine, but it doesn't seem to deter paranormal activity here. with the lingering souls from two different wars, the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, wandering around the grounds of the powder magazine. Very close to the mass grave site was a Greek church that is long gone, and it was used as a hospital during the Battle of Williamsburg, and I use that term loosely because it was more like an amputation center for arms and legs hit by bullets. The bullet would hit the bone, shatter it, and it would be a risky gamble of infection and gangrene under the unsterilized conditions of this so-called hospital. So I would say the paranormal activity was from the men wounded in battle that lost their limbs at the Greek church and later perished there. People staying at the Market Square Tavern, for example, have experienced watching a one-armed Confederate soldier digging out in the backyard. See, the battle had 3,843 casualties. And not only that, but there was a moniker given to a Yankee surgeon. They called him the Yankee Butcher because he got drunk and unnecessarily cut off arms and legs, especially of Confederate soldiers. So there you have the historical, if not macabre, background to this paranormal event, the story of children and the ghost militia. Both the original wall and the original guardhouse were pulled down in the 19th century, and both have been rebuilt with the aid of archaeology, sketches, and engravings that showed their appearance. Just recently, Colonial Williamsburg rebuilt the wall a second time to a historically more accurate and lower height. But keep in mind, my photos were taken before these recent modifications. So in my photos, the wall is higher. As I mentioned before, the historical significance of George Washington and his men in and out of this building multiple times made it both compelling and intriguing for my paranormal quest. This building was so historical, and I wanted it to be in my first book on ghosts of Williamsburg, but I came to here about 30 times and never got so much as one orb. But all that changed once a group of middle school students from Southern California came to town. One evening right before dusk, I was walking up to the Duke of Gloucester Street, and I noticed a group of students standing at the entrance to the yard surrounding the powder magazine. I aimed my camera at the building, not really expecting much, as usual, but I captured a massive group of orbs over that field. Immediately I realized that the area was paranormally active, so hey, I stayed. Colonial Williamsburg was training a group of middle schoolers from Southern California how to be in the Virginia militia. They were taught military drills, including how to line up, how to march, and other commands that every trained 18th century soldier would have to know. As the sky blackened, 3 of Colonial Williamsburg's militiamen marched out and stood at attention at the ceremony's beginning. And I photographed them from the back, and they were completely surrounded by a number of orbs. Evidently, these orbs were interested in participating in the military proceedings. A few seconds later, a drummer began his march across the field, beating out a signal that was evidently a call to attention, and 1 or perhaps 2 phantoms marched in sync with or over him. As As the ceremony continued, I captured what appears to be 3 ghosts from the 18th century, complete with tri-corner hats, and one appears to be leaning on a gun. All this led up to the coup de grace, the photo that captured more ghosts than anyone has ever photographed in a single photo. I captured a whole ghost militia lined up in formation against the wall of the powder magazine, as if they were ready for training maneuvers. I also snapped a second photo of the ghost militia as they moved in front of the gate. Even though these photos were not as clear as I would have liked, you can now make out in the close-up what appears to be men lined up at the wall in the 18th century uniforms. The determining factor would be the bandoliers going across the front of some of their uniforms. Some Colonial Williamsburg interpreters have even suggested that this group might be British soldiers sent to steal the gunpowder from the magazine. Whether they were British soldiers or Virginia militiamen, they're still the largest group of ghosts that I or anybody else has ever taken in a single photograph. After the pomp and circumstance of the short military ceremony was over, Colonial Williamsburg reenactors invited the students in the yard to begin their training. As the group gathered near the wall, what I discovered next was even more profound. All of the phantom soldiers broke ranks and surrounded these middle schoolers as they lined up to perform military drills, standing around them as if they were there to support the young trainees. Photographs were a profound moment of discovery for me as I realized it's possible for ghosts to not only gather in large groups, but also a seeming desire to interact with children. So here's the paranormal proof that ghosts are attracted to youth and that they wanted to interact with them. Those kids had no idea they were surrounded by ghosts. But you see the proof right here, and no, I didn't tell them. As for the veracity of these photographs, I would submit them to a forensic photographic analyst to validate them, because the only thing that I changed was I turned up the brightness and the contrast so that you could see the militiamen better. So there you have it. Largest group of ghosts ever captured on camera in a single photo. A whole ghost militia. Right here in Colonial Williamsburg at the Powder Magazine. That breakthrough at this site seemed to open doors for other ghosts to show up later, and most of these photos are of bearded men indicating the mid-19th century Civil War era. You see, 18th century men did not sport beards. They wore their hair long in a ponytail with clean-shaven faces. So if you see any apparitions with beards, I'd venture to say that they were victims of the Civil War Battle of Williamsburg, and that they were interred in a mass grave nearby the Powder Magazine. As I mentioned in my first video, I lead Ghostographer tours here, and I point out the places where I've taken photographs and encourage people on my tour to take their own pictures. Sure, they don't have the specially modified cameras that I have, but some people are still able to capture ghost photos on their cell phone cameras if they're at the right place at the right time. So here are some of the photos taken by guests on my tours at the Powder magazine, and again, as I proved in my first video, you're not just believing one person, but many. And all of the people in each tour were a witness to the veracity of these photos, because they saw the photos immediately after they were taken. So I have a small army of people that have witnessed both my photos and photos that others have taken just seconds later. My proof that these photos are genuine and not some Photoshop trick, as some people say. See more ghost photos taken by people on my tour at the Ghostographer Tours Facebook page. Now I'm going to show all of the photos of the Powder magazine again, as well as a few taken right near this location, so that you could see that Williamsburg is America's most haunted city, in my opinion. See, I have books on Amazon, and check them out for Breakthrough Ghost Photography. The first two are on Colonial Williamsburg, the third on the whole state of Virginia. I'm currently working on my fourth book, going to places all over the United States that have been visited by paranormal TV shows, and I'm getting the proof that they did not or could not get during their investigation. Stay tuned for that.